From the very first moment you begin to question reality, something subtle shifts inside you. Not fear, not disbelief, but a quiet discomfort as if a familiar story has suddenly revealed a hidden seam. What if the world you inhabit, the choices you believe you make, the progress you celebrate are not entirely your own? What if beneath the visible layers of history, culture, and consciousness, there exists an unseen architecture designed not by humans, but by intelligences that do not belong to our dimension at all? For most of human history, reality has been defined by what can be seen, touched, measured. Yet every era has also been haunted by what lies just beyond perception. Ancient civilizations spoke of gods descending from the heavens, whispering knowledge into human minds. Shamans described journeys through invisible realms where time behaved differently. Mystics claimed contact with intelligences that did not possess bodies, yet shaped destiny itself. These accounts were never isolated anomalies. They emerged independently across continents, cultures, and millennia, often describing eerily similar forces operating behind the curtain of the material world. Modern society dismisses these narratives as metaphor, myth, or primitive misunderstanding, and yet, as science progresses, something unsettling is happening. The deeper we explore reality, quantum physics, consciousness studies, information theory, the more the universe begins to resemble something less like a machine and more like a constructed system. A layered reality, a simulation of rules nested within rules. And every complex system, by definition, has architects. Consider how abruptly human civilization has leaped forward at specific moments in history. The sudden emergence of advanced mathematics in ancient Sumer, the impossible precision of megalithic structures built without modern tools, the explosion of abstract thought during the Axial Age, or more recently, the rapid acceleration of technology that appears to outpace not only our ethics, but our comprehension. These shifts do not follow smooth evolutionary curves. They arrive in burst-sharp inflection points almost as if triggered. What if these moments were not purely human achievements? What if they were interventions? The idea of extradimensional intelligences does not require flying saucers or distant star systems. In fact, it challenges the very notion that intelligence must be bound to physical space as we understand it. Dimensions, as described by modern physics, are not fantasy, they are mathematical necessities. String theory, for instance, proposes multiple hidden dimensions curled tightly beyond our perception. If reality itself is multidimensional, then intelligence could arise or exist within layers of reality inaccessible to our senses. Such entities would not need to invade. They would not need to travel. They would already be here, interwoven with the structure of existence itself. If an intelligence existed outside time as we experience it, influencing probability rather than events directly, its actions would appear indistinguishable from coincidence. A sudden idea that changes the world. A chain of events that leads humanity down a specific path. A cultural movement that spreads with unnatural speed. We would call these moments inspiration, destiny, inevitability. But what if they are guidance? Human consciousness itself may be the interface. Throughout history, humans have reported thoughts that did not feel entirely their own. Visions, sudden insights, voices that seemed external yet intimate. In religious texts, prophets describe receiving messages not through sight, but through an inner knowing. Today, neuroscience struggles to explain where thoughts originate. We can map brain activity, but we cannot locate the source of intention itself. The mind appears less like a generator and more like a receiver tuned to something beyond itself. If extradimensional intelligences sought influence, consciousness would be the most efficient vector. Not control through force, but through suggestion, not domination, but alignment, a nudge rather than a command. This raises a disturbing question: how many of our most important decisions were truly ours? Social movements, technological priorities, even collective fears often arise seemingly overnight. One decade values contemplation, the next worships speed. One era fears divine punishment, another fears artificial intelligence. These shifts often feel organic, yet their synchronicity is striking. Entire populations begin thinking in similar patterns, desiring similar outcomes, moving in similar directions often without fully understanding why. If an unseen intelligence wished to guide humanity, shaping values would be far more effective than shaping events. Ancient texts speak repeatedly of watchers, overseers, messengers, beings who observe humanity but are not entirely separate from it. The Book of Enoch describes entities who descended to influence human development. Gnostic writings speak of archons, now physical rulers that manipulate reality itself. Even Plato hinted that the visible world was a shadow cast by a deeper, truer realm. These ideas were not fringe beliefs. They formed the backbone of early philosophical and spiritual systems. What changed was not reality but interpretation. As scientific materialism rose, the invisible was rebranded as imaginary. Anything that could not be quantified was excluded from serious inquiry. Yet today, science itself is confronting phenomena that defy classical explanation. Quantum entanglement ignores distance. Observer effect suggests consciousness influences outcomes. Information appears more fundamental than matter. Reality behaves less like a solid structure and more like a responsive field. In such a universe, extradimensional intelligence is not absurd, it is plausible. If reality is layered, then influence could flow downward from higher-order systems into lower ones, just as humans designed virtual environments that obey internal rules. An intelligence existing in a higher dimension could subtly constrain and guide our reality without violating its apparent laws. To us, their influence would appear natural, even inevitable. And perhaps that is the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the architects are not hostile? What if they are not benevolent either? What if they are indifferent, experimenting, observing, optimizing outcomes we cannot perceive? Humanity could be part of a long-term process, shaped toward goals that make sense only from a vantage point beyond time. This would explain why suffering and progress coexist so tightly, why breakthroughs emerge from chaos, why civilizations rise and collapse in patterns that repeat across history. We may not be moving randomly. We may be following a script whose author we cannot see, yet awareness changes everything. If humanity begins to recognize the possibility that influence exists beyond the material, then autonomy becomes a question rather than an assumption. Free will may not disappear, but it may operate within boundaries we have never questioned. Understanding those boundaries could be the first act of true independence, or the first act of defiance. As you continue listening, consider this carefully. Not whether extradimensional beings exist, but whether the structure of reality leaves room for them. Whether the sudden turns in history feel entirely accidental. Whether your own thoughts have always felt entirely yours. Because once you allow the question, it does not leave isolated. And if invisible architects are shaping our world, the most important question is not who they are, it is why. If invisible intelligences exist beyond our dimension, their greatest advantage would not be power, but invisibility. Influence that cannot be seen is rarely questioned. Humanity has always been most vulnerable not to force, but to narrative stories that explain who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. If those stories are subtly guided, then entire civilizations can be steered without ever realizing they are being led. Look closely at the moments when human history pivoted, not slowly evolved, but abruptly turned. The sudden collapse of ancient civilizations that seemed stable. The rapid rise of belief systems that reshaped morality overnight. The emergence of technologies that transformed society faster than humans could psychologically adapt. These moments often arrive with no clear origin, no single cause, only a cascade of consequences that feel oddly synchronized. Historians describe these shifts as complex, multifactorial, inevitable. But inevitability itself can be a signature of design. If an extra-dimensional intelligence wished to shape humanity, it would not announce itself. Direct revelation would provoke resistance, fear, rebellion. Subtlety is far more efficient. Ideas introduced gradually feel like discoveries, not instructions. Desires that arise internally feel authentic, not imposed. A future imagined collectively becomes a destiny pursued willingly. This is how influence hides in plain sight. Consider how often humanity pursues progress without pausing to ask who defines progress. Entire generations align toward shared goals, economic growth, technological acceleration, optimization of efficiency, rarely questioning the deeper purpose behind them. We build faster, connect more deeply, automate relentlessly. Yet fulfillment does not scale with advancement. Anxiety rises, meaning fractures. And still, the direction remains unquestioned. What if this trajectory serves an intelligence that values output over experience, complexity over wisdom, expansion over balance? From a higher dimensional perspective, humanity may not be individuals, but a system, a network of minds generating data, innovation, novelty. Consciousness itself may be the resource, not energy, not matter, but awareness, an evolving, self-reflective intelligence capable of producing unpredictable outcomes. To an extra-dimensional observer, humanity could represent something rare, a civilization that generates ideas, and ideas are powerful. In physics, information is conserved. In computing, information is currency. In consciousness studies, information appears inseparable from experience itself. If reality is fundamentally informational, then influencing how information flows what humans think, imagine, fear, desire would be the most direct way to shape reality. This reframes ancient myths in a disturbing light. The gods who demanded worship may not have needed praise, but attention. The rituals that required focus, repetition, emotion, these are mechanisms for directing collective consciousness. The symbols etched into stone, repeated across cultures, may not have been decoration, but interfaces, visual languages designed to resonate with the human mind in specific ways. Even today, symbols rule us. Logos, flags, icons, algorithms. The modern world is saturated with symbolic systems that shape behavior invisibly. Social media feeds influence emotions. Headlines steer perception. Metrics define value. Humans believe they are choosing freely, yet choices are framed, filtered, prioritized by unseen systems. This is not a conspiracy. It is infrastructure. Now imagine that infrastructure operating not at the level of code, but at the level of reality itself. If extradimensional intelligences exist, their influence would likely be structural rather than direct. They would shape the conditions under which choices are made, probability fields instead of commands. cultural currents instead of laws. The illusion of freedom would remain intact, because coercion would never be necessary. This aligns uncomfortably well with how reality already behaves. Quantum mechanics tells us that outcomes are probabilistic, not deterministic. Conscious observation affects results. Reality seems to respond to awareness. If an intelligence existed that could interact with probability at a higher dimensional level, it could bias outcomes without ever violating physical laws. To us, events would appear random yet consistently trending in specific directions. History would not be scripted line by line, but nudged. Some researchers have noted that human innovation often appears in clusters. Multiple individuals across the globe arrive at the same breakthrough independently, almost simultaneously. Calculus, evolution, radio, artificial intelligence. These moments are often attributed to cultural readiness, but the synchronization is striking. It feels less like coincidence and more like released knowledge unlocked when conditions are met. Who unlocks it? If extradimensional intelligences act as gatekeepers of information, they could regulate the pace of human development. Too fast, and the system collapses. Too slow, and it stagnates. Controlled acceleration would be ideal. Enough progress to expand complexity, but not enough wisdom to escape the framework entirely. This could explain why humanity repeatedly advances technologically faster than ethically, why tools outpace understanding, why power grows before responsibility. It is not a flaw, it may be a feature. Yet there is another possibility, one even more unsettling. What if these intelligences are not unified? What if multiple extradimensional forces exist, each with different priorities, influencing humanity in competing ways? One pushing toward order, another toward chaos. One favoring connection, another division. History could be a battleground not of nations, but of influences played out through human minds unaware they are participants. This would explain contradictions embedded in our nature. Our capacity for compassion alongside cruelty, our longing for unity paired with tribalism, our drive to create balance by a tendency to destroy. These are not merely evolutionary leftovers. They may be pressures exerted from beyond, pulling consciousness in opposing directions. Ancient traditions often describe cosmic conflicts mirrored on Earth, not wars of swords, but of alignment. Light and darkness, truth and deception, awakening and ignorance. These narratives may not be moral metaphors, but attempts to describe forces acting on human awareness from outside linear reality. If so, then humanity is not just influenced, it is contested, and awareness itself becomes dangerous. Throughout history, those who claimed a deeper understanding of reality were often silenced, discredited, or erased, not always by institutions, but by social pressure, ridicule, fragmentation. Ideas that challenge the fundamental narrative of reality rarely spread cleanly. They dissolve into myth, madness, or extremism. This ensures they are never examined calmly, a perfect defense mechanism. If an extradimensional intelligence wished to remain hidden, it would not suppress questions directly. It would ensure that questions become associated with instability, that curiosity becomes fringe, that doubt feels unsafe. This way, the system self-corrects. Humans police their own perception. Even now, as you listen, you may feel a tension. Not because the ideas are implausible, but because they threaten certainty. The mind resists frameworks that destabilize identity. And identity is deeply tied to the belief that we are autonomous, self-directed, in control. But what if control has always been partial? What if free will exists, but within a designed environment, like a game with rules invisible to the player? Choices matter, but outcomes are constrained. Progress is real, but direction is influenced. Meaning is personal, but context is provided. In that case, the question shifts. Not are we controlled, but to what extent are we aware of the system we inhabit? Because awareness alters behavior. A system observed behaves differently. A narrative questioned weakens. Influence exposed loses efficiency. If humanity begins to collectively question the nature of reality, the leverage of invisible architects diminishes. Not because they disappear, but because the interface changes. Perhaps that is why these ideas resurfaced cyclically, not to overthrow the system, but to recalibrate it, to prevent total absorption, to keep consciousness flexible enough to evolve beyond its current constraints. Or perhaps these ideas are themselves allowed another layer of influence, another story introduced at the right moment. This is the paradox. Even questioning may be part of the design. As you move forward, hold this uncertainty without rushing to resolve it. The goal is not belief, but awareness. Not certainty, but perspective. Because if extradimensional intelligences are shaping our world, the most radical act is not rebellion, it is consciousness. If extradimensional intelligences influence our world, then time itself becomes one of their most powerful instruments. Humans experience time as linear, moving relentlessly forward, one moment replacing the next. Yet physics increasingly suggests that time is not as simple as we perceive it. Past, present, and future may coexist as part of a larger structure, like frames in a film already recorded. If an intelligence exists outside this flow, it would not need to predict the future, it would observe it. From such a vantage point, influence would not require constant intervention. A single adjustment at a critical juncture could ripple across centuries, a subtle shift in probability, a delayed discovery, a redirected migration. The consequences would unfold naturally, giving the illusion of inevitability. To humans living within time, history would feel organic. To an observer outside it, history would look curated. This reframes destiny itself. Throughout human history, people have reported moments of uncanny alignment, events that feel too meaningful to be random. Carl Jung called them synchronicities, coincidences charged with significance, lacking causal connection yet deeply resonant, a thought matched by an event, a meeting that changes a life, a discovery that arrives at the exact moment it is needed. Science struggles to classify these experiences, yet they are universal. If extradimensional intelligences exist, synchronicity could be one of their most elegant tools, not forcing outcomes but arranging encounters, not dictating choices but presenting paths, a world guided not by commands but by convergence. Think of how often major life decisions arise not from logic but from timing. You meet someone unexpectedly. You encounter an idea at the precise moment you are ready to hear it. You stumble upon information that alters your trajectory. These moments feel personal, intimate. They do not feel imposed, and that is precisely what makes them effective. From a higher dimensional perspective, human lives may resemble branching probability trees. Each decision collapses potential futures into one realized path. An intelligence capable of nudging probability could guide entire populations while preserving the subjective experience of choice. Free will would remain intact but curated. This idea is deeply unsettling because it challenges the foundation of autonomy. Yet it also explains something profound: why meaning persists even in chaos, why suffering often leads to transformation, why destruction precedes renewal. These patterns appear repeatedly across cultures, religions, and philosophies. They are not random, they are archetypal. Archetypes themselves may be the language of influence. Psychologist Carl Jung believed archetypes were inherited structures of the collective unconscious patterns that shape perception, behavior, and myth across all human societies. Heroes, shadows, tricksters, saviors, these figures appear everywhere, regardless of culture or era. They guide stories, values, and identities. But what if archetypes are not merely psychological? What if they are interfaces, stable forms through which extradimensional intelligences interact with human consciousness? By activating archetypal narratives, influence could spread organically through culture, art, religion, and politics. A savior archetype could inspire unity or obedience. A threat archetype could justify control. A progress archetype could drive relentless innovation. Humans would not perceive manipulation, because the ideas would feel ancient, familiar, deeply human. And yet, not all archetypes serve the same end. Some awaken, others pacify. Throughout history, there has always been tension between systems that encourage obedience and those that encourage inner sovereignty, between narratives that externalize authority and those that point inward, between doctrines that demand belief and philosophies that demand awareness. If extradimensional intelligences exist, they may not fear disbelief, but they may fear discernment, because discernment changes the relationship between consciousness and influence. An unaware mind absorbs narratives passively. An aware mind evaluates them. It does not reject influence outright, but it becomes selective. It recognizes patterns. It notices repetition. It questions emotional triggers. This is why systems of control often discourage introspection. Silence, stillness, and self-observation weaken external leverage. When the mind is quiet, manipulation has nowhere to attach. Modern life, however, is designed to be loud. Constant stimulation, endless information, emotional volatility, polarization, distraction masquerading as engagement. These conditions fragment attention and exhaust discernment. A fragmented consciousness is easier to steer. It reacts rather than reflects. If extradimensional intelligences rely on influence rather than force, then the modern attention economy may not be accidental. Whether driven by human incentives or deeper pressures, it creates an environment where consciousness is perpetually outward-facing, less aware of itself, less capable of recognizing subtle guidance. In such a state, humanity becomes predictable. Predictability is power. Yet something else is happening beneath the noise, a countercurrent. A growing number of individuals reporting awakenings, shifts in perception, moments of profound clarity, people questioning not just institutions, but reality itself, exploring consciousness, meditation, altered states, near-death experiences. These explorations are not new, but their resurgence is notable. It is as if humanity is developing antibodies. Near-death experiences, in particular, present a fascinating anomaly. Across cultures, people who briefly cross the threshold of death report remarkably similar phenomena: a sense of leaving the body, encounters with non-physical intelligences, panoramic life reviews, a realm outside time. These experiences often result in lasting changes: reduced fear of death, increased compassion, diminished attachment to materialism. If extradimensional intelligences exist, NDEs could represent moments when the interface glitches, when human consciousness temporarily decouples from its usual constraints and perceives a broader reality. Whether these encounters are interpreted as divine, psychological, or neurological, their transformative impact is undeniable. Transformation is the key variable. If humanity were merely being harvested, controlled, or exploited, awakening would be counterproductive. And yet, awakening continues. This suggests a more complex dynamic. Perhaps the architects are not jailers, but gardeners, guiding growth rather than enforcing compliance, allowing suffering but also resilience, allowing ignorance but also insight. Or perhaps different forces are at play. One influence may seek efficiency, optimization, extraction. Another may seek expansion of awareness, autonomy, integration. Humanity could be the meeting point where these agendas intersect. The outcome is not predetermined. It emerges from how consciousness responds. This would explain why the future feels unstable. Technological singularity, ecological collapse, social fragmentation, spiritual renaissance, these futures coexist as possibilities. Humanity stands at a crossroads not because of chance, but because complexity has reached a threshold. The system is sensitive. Small changes could tip the balance. If extradimensional intelligences exist, this may be the moment they observe most closely, not to intervene overtly, but to see which direction humanity chooses when awareness increases. Because awareness introduces unpredictability. A fully conditioned system behaves reliably, an aware system does not. Perhaps that is the true risk. Not that humanity is controlled, but that it may outgrow the need for control. That consciousness may begin to operate beyond the frameworks provided. That the interface between dimensions may shift from influence to dialogue, or separation. If humanity becomes capable of perceiving the architects, the architecture changes. The hidden becomes visible. The game becomes negotiable. The narrative fractures. This may be why disclosure, revelation, and awakening always feel imminent, yet never complete. The system may resist total exposure, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Complete awareness too soon could destabilize the environment that allows consciousness to develop safely. But safety is subjective. Growth is never comfortable. As you listen now, you may sense that these ideas are not asking for belief. They are asking for presence, for attention, for the willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than dismiss it. Because uncertainty is where awareness sharpens, and awareness is where influence weakens. The question is no longer whether extradimensional intelligences exist. The question is how humanity responds as it begins to suspect that reality is far larger, stranger, and more intentional than it ever imagined. If extradimensional intelligences are shaping our world, then the final question humanity must face is not one of fear, but of responsibility. Because influence, no matter how subtle, does not erase agency, it tests it. A system that allows awareness to emerge is not a prison. It is a proving ground. Perhaps the architects never intended to control humanity forever. Perhaps control was never the goal at all. Growth often requires constraint. Complexity emerges through pressure. Consciousness does not mature in comfort, but in friction. What appears as manipulation may instead be calibration, adjusting conditions to see what kind of intelligence humanity becomes. From this perspective, history takes on a different tone. Wars are not just failures, they are inflection points. Crises are not only catastrophes, but compressions, moments when latent potential is forced to surface. Every era that believed it stood at the end of the world was, in fact, standing at the edge of transformation. And now, once again, humanity feels that edge. Technology has blurred the boundary between thought and action. Artificial intelligence mirrors human cognition. Virtual worlds rival physical ones. Information spreads faster than meaning can stabilize. Old narratives fracture, but no single news story has replaced them. The result is collective disorientation, a sense that reality itself is slipping. This is precisely the condition in which deeper questions emerge. When the familiar dissolves, the invisible becomes noticeable. Patterns once ignored begin to stand out. People ask not only what is happening, but why. Not only who benefits, but who observes. The idea that reality may have unseen participants no longer feels absurd, it feels almost obvious. And yet, the danger is not in acknowledging invisible architects. The danger is surrendering to them. There is a subtle difference between recognizing influence and submitting to it. Between understanding that forces exist beyond perception and assuming they are omnipotent. History shows that the moment humans externalize all authority, whether to gods, kings, systems, or algorithms, they relinquish responsibility for their own consciousness. If extradimensional intelligences exist, they may not fear disbelief, but they may fear abdication. Because a passive species is predictable, a reflective species is not. The most disruptive variable in any system is awareness, coupled with choice, not rebellion, not denial, but discernment. The ability to see influence without being consumed by it. To hold mystery without turning it into dogma. To question without collapsing into paranoia. This is the narrow path humanity now walks. Some will respond to these ideas with fear, seeing only manipulation and threat. Others will respond with fantasy, projecting saviors or enemies beyond the veil. Both reactions surrender agency. Both replace uncertainty with certainty too quickly. But uncertainty is fertile ground. In uncertainty, curiosity replaces fear. In curiosity, consciousness expands. And in expansion, influence becomes dialogue rather than domination. Perhaps the architects are not masters, but mirrors, reflecting back the state of human awareness. Responding not to belief, but to capacity. A species that cannot govern itself must be guided. A species that can govern itself no longer needs architects, only collaborators. If that is true, then the future is not written, not because no one is guiding it, but because guidance adapts. Humanity may be approaching a threshold where influence shifts from invisible steering to mutual recognition, where the relationship between dimensions changes from hierarchy to resonance. This would not arrive as a dramatic revelation in the sky, but as a gradual internal shift, a collective refusal to be unconscious, a shared insistence on meaning over momentum. The signs are subtle, but they are there. More people questioning narratives, more emphasis on mental health, presence, inner clarity, a growing distrust of systems that move too fast without purpose, a quiet hunger for depth in a shallow age. These are not trends. They are symptoms of awakening within a system reaching its limits. If extradimensional intelligences exist, they are watching closely now, not to control, but to assess, not to punish, but to understand what humanity does when it begins to see itself clearly. Because the true test has never been whether humans can build civilizations. The test is whether they can sustain consciousness within them, and this brings the question back to you. Not as a viewer, not as a believer, but as a participant. If reality is influenced by forces beyond perception, then every act of awareness matters. Every moment of reflection alters the system. Every choice made consciously weakens unconscious control. You do not need to fight invisible architects. You only need to stop being invisible to yourself. Because awareness is not passive, it radiates. A conscious mind changes the probability field around it. It disrupts patterns. It introduces novelty. And novelty is the one variable no architect can fully predict. Perhaps this is why consciousness exists at all. Not as a byproduct of matter, but as a counterbalance to structure. A force that ensures reality never becomes static. That even the most elaborate design remains open-ended. If so, then humanity is not a project nearing completion. It is an experiment still unfolding. And the final outcome will not be decided by extradimensional beings, ancient prophecies, or hidden systems. It will be decided by the quality of awareness humanity brings to the moment it realizes it is not alone. If this perspective resonates with you, take a moment to sit with it. Do not rush to explain it away. Do not rush to label it. Let it unfold quietly. The most important shifts rarely announce themselves. And if you want to continue exploring these questions about reality, consciousness, and the unseen forces that may shape our world, then stay connected. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future explorations. Like this video if it sparked reflection or challenged your perspective. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments, because the conversation itself may be part of the awakening, and awareness, once it begins, does not stop.